Ultima Exodus. This is the ultimate role-playing fantasy game. And welcome to Nostalgia, a chronological exploration of every NES game released in North America. I'm Mike.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Joe.
The day has come. We have been talking about it for a long time on this show. An RPG, a real one if you will, is finally here. It's a WRPG, not a JRPG, but I think we can all feel satisfied, right?
That's
Yes.
interesting. I've never heard that term before for just Western RPG.
Yeah, Western RPGs. I think, there's even, debate if this is a CRPG, computer.
I'll call it.
game.
We'll call it a console port of a CRPG.
I like that. Okay.
Yeah.
I think of WRPGs. The first that comes to my head is Fallout. That you would not. It's definitely an RPG, but you wouldn't experience anything Final Fantasy like in Fallout.
True. Yeah.
Yeah,
I guess the
I've
terms
always
are
heard it.
interchangeable.
I've always heard it just Western RPG. I've never actually heard it abbreviated like that, but I guess it makes sense if we have JRPGs.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's exciting to have something that's not just like a game that has some RPG elements now. Like, this is an RPG. Make no mistake.
And so we're really, entering new territory here on how to do a show where a game is massive. I think so many times the games that we review can be boiled down into what are today's mini games, but this is a full 20-hour plus game with so many nuances, and as Sean mentioned, is really like a computer game that then got ported to the NES. So how we deal with this is just going to be a learning experience for everybody, and just bear with us through this, so this way when we do some better RPGs that people know about, like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, we'll find our footing. So the Ultima Exodus, I'm officially declaring this a test episode. What do you guys think about that?
I agree. I mean, when we can spend I don't know if it was 30, 40, or 50 minutes on Popeye, which is basically doing two things for maybe 15 minutes before you get sick of it. And then this in the same show, I hope that we don't do it for 5 hours, but let's just see where we take it.
Now, the length of the game is definitely something worth talking about. And technically, right, the great arcade games of the NES, you could invest more than 20 hours into those games. I'm not sure how many people are doing that today, but I'm sure there are kids who played 20 plus hours of Donkey Kong if they loved Donkey Kong.
Sure, but that kind of thing, I think what the difference is that kind of thing is there's the gameplay loop is more condensed. It's you're doing the one thing, you're trying to get better at that one skill. This is it still has a gameplay loop, but it's just a sprawling adventure. It's closer to The Legend of Zelda in that sense, I think, where it's you're exploring and you're trying to get new weapons and armor, and in this case, level up and whatnot.
It's constantly new information being thrown at you. You can't just continue to do the same thing over and over again.
It's not so much a test of skill as it is a test of preparation and perseverance through grind. And yeah, it's a completely different experience.
And so given the extreme length of this NES game, nowhere near as long as games today can be, but given that this is a long NES game, my first concern with just the game in general happens right on the very back of the box. You're reading about this great story, and you're going on an adventure, and look at all these cool features. And one of those cool features is that, and it's advertised on the back of the box, it advertises a 5-year lithium battery. 5 years isn't really going to do you much good 30 years later. So what do you think here? What do you think? Anybody got a working copy with the original lithium battery still, or does everybody's saves from 1989 are gone now?
Oh, they're gone.
Yeah.
But I also think that if I was buying this game as a teenager in '89, I would have thought that 5 years was plenty. You don't really think too far ahead when you're that young. So
yeah, and also I feel the just developers and stuff weren't thinking about weren't thinking about like, oh, what's the legacy of this game going to be in 2021, or anything like that. Whereas like now, I feel like we're more accustomed to like nostalgia, and like people look for their old, Gen 2 Pokemon games and realize that they don't work anymore. And I feel like now a developer might think about something like that, but like back then it was just like, okay, we release this, we'll release Ultima 4 next year, and we'll never think about this again.
Well, even your own saves, though, right, gentlemen? Like, how often do you get very precious about your own save files only to realize that you never have checked in on them again?
Oh, PS1 era, maybe even PS2 era. I've definitely got some like Final Fantasy 7 and 8 saves that like I definitely have a save in Final Fantasy 7 where I got like this really weird situation to occur, but like you have to move on from that. So I just made a copy for it.
Yeah,
but I haven't looked at it.
Funnily enough, in Final Fantasy VIII, I used to love that game, and anytime I would get to like a cool cutscene or an interesting part that I really liked, I would save it in a different save slot after that. So I'd always have all of those. Like, oh, I ever want to go back and play this part, I can go do that.
Hits.
Never did that. But I always had it in case I wanted to go back and play like an earlier part in my playthrough.
I did something like that with Kingdom Hearts, the original Kingdom Hearts, because it gives you 99 save files. I would save before every boss with the idea that, like, oh, now when I'm done with this game, I can have, like, a boss rush where I can just select the save file I want and battle those bosses. And I will tell you, from experience, I never did that. I never went back and loaded up any of those saves and fought any of those bosses again. Maybe, like, one or two, but for the most part, that's how my save systems work. And I think that's important to start this discussion about Ultima with, because ultimately, the games that you... Yeah, right? The games that you play, though, like, they only matter while you're playing them and the memories that you make during them. Not these, like, 100% completions where you, like, strictly follow a guide and do everything and then have this, like, perfect save file. Because at the end of the day, like, you don't track your save files across your lifetime. Like, I cannot tell you what's going on with my, earliest video games. I don't know what the save files look like for those games, and I don't care because I have those memories instead. So when you're going on a big journey like Ultima Exodus, the 5-year lithium battery probably doesn't even matter that much in the grand scheme of things, but it also just doesn't matter at all after you're done with the game. Like, the important part is playing through the game and doing what you do with it, not doing it for the sake of completion.
I mostly agree, but I will say that there are some games when it is like when I've completed a game or when I've maxed out a level, which I've only done in something, maybe like Kingdom Hearts, or like if I've gotten a really high level in any other game or something. I do like to once in a while like go jump into like my level 99 file of Kingdom Hearts, because I don't want to grind to level 99 again, but it's fun to kind of explore things as a level 99 character again. Like, I like to keep that stuff, as it's a little trophy. I don't know. It's.
I could also see it. I remember I kept a file in Red Dead before you get kind of railroaded for the rest of the game, just so that you have that file to go and dick around and do cowboy shit if you ever want to return to it. So going back to that idea, I think I have actually come back. Yeah.
So, am I wrong to think like this is 1989? It's the first RPG truly on the system. Dungeons and Dragons is not, it's only tabletop, paper, and pen. This is like Dungeons and Dragons coming to the NES. Like, this is kind of a big deal for, Dungeons and Dragons fans, role-playing fans, a new way to play tabletop games, because now it's like the game is the game master, the dungeon master who handles like so much of the world building for you. And yeah, these things existed on Apple II and Commodore 64 for like a really long time before this, but the NES is so famous because it introduced an entire new generation to video gaming. Like they weren't, not every family had an Apple II and then also went to like these stores and bought these games. So really, like, a lot of people were only gaming on the NES. So this is a eye-opening moment for a lot of people, just in terms of like what's possible in terms of storytelling and really feeling like you're going on an adventure inside of a video game, something where everything's programmed for you.
Yeah, I'm actually very surprised as somebody who didn't really know the history of RPGs on the NES. Like, yeah, I knew about Final Fantasy, and yeah, I had heard of like Dragon Quest / Warrior, but I did not think that the first RPG that we get on the NES isn't like that classic JRPG style, but is this sort of Western CRPG that isn't like a perfect one-to-one of D&D systems, but it's much closer than any JRPG. And I always just thought that it would be kind of simplified, because I do kind of consider JRPGs to be simplified. So yeah, in 1989, people are getting like they've got a food system, and there's like you're keeping track of the wind and the moon cycles, and like this is just so much information that like that's just what RPGs were. I'm kind of going off the rails here if you want to save me.
Yeah, no, I'll save you for a second, because I think you did make one very strong point though, of like, it's surprising that this is the first one to come. And that's true, right? Like, you would think a Japanese developer, because they did make those games in 86, 87, like they were totally available. They just weren't translated and brought over to the West. And I think that's because the NES by Nintendo of America's standards was set up to be this like play your arcade games at home, buy this wacky dance pad, shoot ducks, like they weren't really selling the complications that a game like Ultima or even, Final Fantasy would offer you. They were kind of like saying, well, we don't really know if that audience would play these kinds of games on our systems because of the limitations of an NES against an Apple II. I don't think you're going to be able to sell the same people that play pen and paper to be like, oh, well, this is like just as good as your imagination and all the things that you can possibly control via pen and paper. Like, we're going to be able to do all that on the NES, and you're going to love it. Like, maybe they weren't sold on that idea.
You're going to love it. You little bitch.
I'm sure that was the actual conversation in the execs room.
Yeah.
I think that was their like marketing campaign.
Yeah.
That was like their commercial.
And this is Ultima Exodus, not Ultima 3 Exodus. I think that's the right move, for what it's worth. I always have an opinion on titles. That's very confusing to release the third Ultima game and call it Ultima 3 and pretend like, 1 and 2, you have to go buy other systems that we don't have.
Yeah.
And also, like, this is your first time experiencing this and you want to go on an adventure. Do I need to play 1 and 2 to understand 3? Like, I think that was the right move to remove all that. But it's also not really Ultima 3 at the end of the day. This is a whole new soundtrack. The graphics are modified completely for the NES. There's considerable alterations to even, like, the gameplay in terms of how long the game is and what you can do inside of it. They expanded a lot of dialogue to be more clear and direct about what to do. And I think, in the computer version, the biggest change here probably is that in the computer version, you use a keyboard to control all your different menus and bring up different things. There is no NES keyboard peripheral, so they had to figure out a way to put everything that you need in menus in one particular menu that you can then shuffle through to enter other menus. I know I said menus a lot there, but the idea basically just being that...
Yeah, this game has a lot of menus.
Yeah, they had to figure out a way to cram all these menus into one bigger menu, and it kind of works like how... And this is the simplest explanation I can think of, but it works like Pokemon in that sense of, like, you hit the start button, and every menu option that you'll ever need in the game pulls up. It's very similar to that. And I think that's the right call over hitting like F or G or H, like we don't need all those keys.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the difference there is that like something like Pokemon, though, the menu is things that you want to do that are not on like the main field. You know what I mean? Like you want to go into your items, or you want to go look at your Pokemon or look at your stats. Whereas this, it's like, if you want to talk to someone, you open up a menu and you select the talk option.
That's
and if
something...
you want to, anything, if you want to fight, you open up the menu and you click fight, and then a battle will start, if you're in front of someone that you can fight.
Yeah, that's something that I think, it's definitely a sign of its age and of its time, but I definitely think that a lot of these things could have been context based. Like, no one's going to want to fight a treasure chest. You're going to want to open it. Most people aren't going to try and fight a townsperson. They're probably going to want to talk to them. And I feel like every other like lesser action could have been put in those menus. But yeah, it's definitely just a sign of like this very early realm of RPG gaming. So I get it.
Yeah, and just the fact that it's port, it's because they're trying to. They're like, okay, we have all these commands that you do on the keyboard. Well, let's just put them all in a menu, and they like don't think more about it as to like, well, can we go even further and make it context?
Can we streamline this? Yeah.
But although I guess now thinking of that, they probably could have streamlined it even on the keyboard version and made it like, you're talking to this person because he's a person you would talk to.
And that's one thing I struggle with when I think about how to talk about this game is who's it really for here? It's not for the usual NES audience. And so I kind of say like, how much of this is, programming code that they don't want to change and they don't want to work with. So yes, you can fight the treasure chest and you can choose to talk to nothing and they'll tell you no one's there, right? Like we don't need those things. But how much of that is programming changes that they don't want to make? And how much of it is like the freedom to do whatever it is that you want to do? That like the fight is a command and an active choice that you make rather than running into a battle or like pressing the A button to talk. It's like, no, you choose to talk to that person because you can also choose to fight every townsperson if you want.
True.
Like I think like there's a decision here, and that's a whole nother like conversation that we'll have later on about, did they make this game for the right audience? But here and just to start things off, I'd argue that they're making this game so obtuse on purpose, as weird as that sounds. Like they're giving you a lot of control and a lot of things that don't necessarily matter on purpose to show you how much this is your story and your world.
True. One thing I'll say just to sort of clarify my opinion, I think you should still be able to fight whoever the hell you want, but maybe like if you just press like the B button or the A button on the field, it'll talk, and then you can go into the menu and choose to fight if you want, just to like make that a little bit easier. But no, I do totally get what you're saying there, that this is about your story and every action should be your own.
It's like a quality of life versus like full immersion. It's like they got to find that balance of like, well, it's just easier to do this because you'll probably mostly want to just talk to townspeople. But it's more immersive if like, I could fight these townspeople if I want and get attacked by the guards and, that whole thing.
But, Joe, can you think of an example, and this is tough because the game is so massive, but can you think of an example where they chose quality of life over the harder option?
No. I mean, yeah, that's you're right. I mean, I agree. I think that like a lot of this game could use some quality of life improvements, but it's just like it's an early example of its kind,
All right, so let's get into a little bit of the meat and potatoes here, all right? This is a game where you make a team of 4 across different races and different jobs. You're traversing their world. You complete quests to collect key items, to try to take down this thing known as Exodus. And your characters grow all the while. They level up, and leveling up works a little different than in usual games, but most of the RPG tropes are there, so we're not going to explain everything here. I want to hear the teams that were created, because there's so many choices here. You choose your job and your race right off the bat, and then you're like stuck with that character. There are some pre-made ones, but I'm just curious to hear everybody's loadouts. So, Sean, let's start with you. What was your team?
My team, I didn't read any stuff that was just like, here's the min-max team. So my team was Chaz the fighter, human fighter. He was based off of a D&D character I once played. Then there's Siln, the elf cleric, who was another character that I played with at one point. Rags, the dwarf something or other. I don't remember what he was. He was a tank though. I forgot my wizard's name, but I had a fuzzy wizard named Marty. His name was Marty.
What a name to forget.
Yeah. Party
thought it was going to be something complicated wizard-esque, but...
No, but yeah, and I saw that there were a bunch of other slots to make more characters, and I was just like, I want to kind of just make these 4. They weren't the most optimized, but they were my guys.
And if you could amuse us for a little bit here, you don't have to take us on your journey or explain story points to anybody here, but what did you think about your team synergy? Did the wizard do all of the damage on the battlefield? Who was your ace?
So a lot of this comes down to what I think of the battle system, which we'll get into later, obviously, but it ended up being, in the early game at least, that it's just the cleric and the wizard that are really going to carry you for a while, because magic is just better. And if you have a full magic team, you're going to do really well in this game. But I was trying to go with a more classic D&D fantasy lineup. And so it was really just 2 guys carrying us for a bit until later when some of those classes sort of come into their own.
Okay, I like that. And just vague enough to let us explore more later. Joe, your team.
So I'm going to try and remember exactly what their races were. I don't remember exactly, but and also I'll say that I pretty much filled up every slot on that. I spent a lot of time on the character customization, and I switched out a little bit until I landed on the party I finally used in the end. So the party I finally used in the end was a human ranger, a cleric, which I believe was a bobbit, an alchemist, which I think was was probably a fuzzy. Which is such a stupid name.
How was the alchemist? The alchemist was the one that I was interested in, but I didn't play with.
I liked him a lot at first because at first I didn't really have anyone that was kind of fulfilling I read a lot of guides too, so I was trying to come up with a really balanced team based on that. So I had so many that I kept making and switching out, because there's actually as much as I was reading different guides, there's not a lot of variety of information on this game online. So I switched out a lot, but the alchemist, I had started with a wizard, but then I was I don't really have a good thief that apparently, I was realizing I needed more and more to open chests and to avoid traps to have high dexterity. So I switched to the alchemist because he also has high dexterity and kind of fits the build of a wizard and a thief. But later in the game, I was really missing the wizard. I wished that I had the wizard by the end. But he was good for most of the game when I was just grinding and stuff. And then my final person was a lark, which I believe was... I don't remember the race of the lark. Probably something that had high strength or high intelligence. I can't remember, though.
Yeah.
So you switched the wizard out for the lark?
I switched the lizard out... I switched the wizard out for the alchemist.
Got it.
But yeah, I had other parties throughout, and I used one for a while and then switched to a totally new party, and we'll probably get into that later. But
it's like an adventure by committee.
Yes, exactly. And I really did have the whole thing filled out. And I was like, I'll pick these couple people now, and I'll pick those couple people. And I sort of used one party to kind of exploit the game, which was another little strategy I read about, which I think made the game much more enjoyable than it would have been if I didn't.
Sure thing. All right, and then as for me, Joe, I'm right with you. I chose the human ranger. I think the ranger was the most fun I had because it's the all-around character. You know, there's some spells, there's some ranged attacks. There's just a lot of practical use in combat for the ranger, and I think mixing close combat with ranged combat in a game like this, as obvious as that might sound, it just also makes for a more enjoyable playthrough rather than having to approach all your enemies and get real close to them and keep attacking and them attacking you. I liked keeping my distances from afar. So I had the human ranger, an elf thief. I wasn't going to go thief, but apparently the thief is like pretty necessary, as Joe was describing for the alchemist, like pretty necessary in terms of dexterity and for unlocking treasure chests and stuff like that.
Still waiting for a name for these guys.
Oh, sorry. I think for personal disclosure, I can't disclose the names because I use real people's names, and I always do this in RPGs. I always name them after real people. So I don't want to name anybody,
Wow. Okay.
I still remember when the character named after me in Final Fantasy II just left on like the first scene of the game, and then turned out to be the bad guy, and then I was not even in the party.
I know, people
for the
take
whole
it
game.
personally. People take it personally. I had an elf lark and a fuzzy wizard, which I feel comfortable disclosing. I named the wizard after our audio producer, Chris. So he's a known wizard in the D&D world, so I figured why not bring him into my game. And to be honest, like, I love the wizard in this game. I probably love just magic casters in general in RPGs. So if you notice, between the ranger, the lark, and the wizard, I had a good time with spells and stuff like that. But also the thief was really useful for acquiring necessary gold and weapons and stuff that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get. So
It's
I didn't, even though I kept the thief out of combat for the most part, because close combat with the thief was kind of, you're like praying that he doesn't take that much damage. And I think you can just equip him with a bunch of daggers and just have him keep throwing those, and then he's kind of arranged.
Yeah.
But that would be very expensive. That'd be a very expensive decision to go through. So I just kind of had the wizard and the ranger take care of everything on the battlefield, and it seemed to work really well for me.
It's interesting that you created a thief, because both of you, because when I was pouring through those guides and let's plays to kind of get a handle on things, it was shown to me that I can't remember if it's a cleric or a wizard spell, but there is an open spell that you don't really need.
I used the open spell almost every time I opened anything. I didn't make a thief. I made a alchemist.
Oh, yes.
He would at least help me avoid traps in dungeons.
Absolutely. All right.
But I pretty quickly was like, okay, I don't need to ever open anything outside of using the open spell.
And I was just never playing with anybody else. I wasn't doing Joe's cheating route, where not that he was cheating, but he was cheating on his characters.
Cheating. Yeah.
No, he's cheating on his characters.
Wait, what was that cheating? What was cheating? I mean, the exploit was cheating, but you're supposed to create a bunch of characters, and I know what you're saying, Mike. I know what you're saying.
Yes,
I'm attacking Sean.
I just can't do that. Like whether it's Final Fantasy 12, where you have a very large party, or Ultima Exodus, or even Pokemon. Like the 6 Pokemon I get, that's the game. Okay, they're not getting swapped out. That's I can't throw them in a computer jail.
I do once in a while. I like to play a Pokemon where I like. All right, I get where I play with 12 Pokemon and I swap out when I want.
I don't know. I actually like to play with teams of 3, but that's a whole nother episode. Anyway,
one.
the I think the point here, even though Sean is right, my strategy probably was like the least optimal. I just chose who I liked. The idea that we can each have very different teams and go out there on an adventure and have varying degrees of success as well is a really cool feature in this game. That there's so many jobs and so many races, and the races are only useful for like stat boosts. I think some are like more optimal
there's
for
no
certain
other
characters.
use of that information in the game.
So it's like, that's not too cool, but it's, it's like enough permutations to make an equation where everybody picks something differently, and that's exciting. For replayability though too. Like,
it's also good for the theater of the mind. Like, when you're imagining what's actually happening here, like that's your fuzzy guy. I don't know what a fuzzy looks like, but he's a fuzzy.
Yeah, and
he doesn't
it
look
just
like
looks
those guys.
Like a regular guy or girl. I can't remember.
Yeah, I was gonna say, he doesn't look like the thing from Super Mario World. Those black guys that ruin your day, and they're on strings. You guys have no idea what I'm talking about. Huh. Yeah, I think they're called fuzzies.
Yeah, World was not my game.
It's okay. I don't know how.
What? There's just a couple like consonants.
I've just never heard anybody say World's not their game.
I love World.
Super Mario 3 was my game. That was
I know. I just like, World is everybody's game. Trust me, it's the game for the world.
Anyway.
All right. Let's talk about combat. Because I feel like even if you talk about exploration or adventure or questing, sooner or later somebody's going to bring up combat anyway. So let's just talk about this. It's different in the sense of it takes a whole new meaning to turn-based gameplay here, because your combat is actually sort of like an SRPG where everybody moves one at a time and you decide what they're going to do individually, and then the opponents go. And so there's this map with all of your characters, all of their characters, and terrain, and you have to kind of figure out what's the best way to approach the situation given the number of enemies, the location, the types of enemies, your party. There's a lot of information on every single combat screen. This is not just choose your attack and then an RNG generator to figure out if it lands or not. That still happens, but there's this whole where you are on the board and
the whole
where everybody
movement.
else is.
Real quick, can you define SRPG?
I'm thinking like strategy RPGs.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
like Fire Emblem.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I was definitely seeing it as like a cross between a standard like 3-on-3 just press attack or spells or whatever RPG and like a tactical game. But I do have a lot of complaints here. And that starts with that whole moving thing. Where your turn is either you move or you use an item or you attack. It's just one or the other. You like I think in any other, like if in tabletop RPGs you can move and then you can do a thing. It was never just one or the other, and that really makes these drag. I don't know if you want to elaborate on your feelings there.
I mean, I felt the same way. I mean, I hadn't really thought of them adding move and attack into like one turn. I think that's definitely like a plus. I don't have any argument against that. But I was initially like the same way. I was like, okay, this sucks, like it's taking so long to get close to anyone and whatever. But as I kind of started to look at it that way and like plan around that, it did get sort of fun, kind of like planning, okay, like, well, I want my character to end up this close to that enemy, and I want this other character that's healing everyone to stay back, and I want this person to be, who's a ranged attacker, to be, on the same plane as like this enemy, so we can attack like at the same time, all the while staying out of like, there are spaces because of the way it works, there are spaces where sometimes you might be able to get hit by two enemies and not be able to hit either of them. So you're going to stay out of these like spaces that are diagonal to an enemy, because basically they can attack diagonally and you can't, which I thought was bad at first too, until I realized, well, it does kind of make you think. I mean, it's kind of a weird way to do it, because it doesn't really like, it doesn't really equal anything in the real world. Like, why can't you attack diagonally?
I kind of saw it as like an anti-exploit sort of thing, so that you couldn't just like kite people throughout, like around the entire map. But go ahead.
I mean, I guess that would make sense too. But I think that eventually I started to look at those things as like stuff to build strategies around. I don't know if that's like a perfectly like sustainable way to make an interesting strategy game, but at least for a while it was like, okay, this is a new way of thinking of things, and it kept me engaged.
The obvious answer for me is exactly what Sean said. I have it here in my show notes that movement and attack need to be like one thing, and I'm sure that would also cause problems if you think about like that the other team also gets to move and attack. But it sounds like every other strategy RPG has figured out how to deal with that, so I don't think Ultima Exodus would run into this problem. However, you can also have what Joe's having, like this idea of a very intense combat system where like you enter a battle and it's like you have to think about, it's like a chessboard, even though it's not a perfect 8x8 grid and there's a role for every different person. You are in a battle where you have to think about where you are, what you're going to do next, and being limited to like one thing that you can do is an interesting idea, because you can either choose to retreat, advance, attack, cast a spell, use an item. Like the one-off thing is pretty interesting because technically you have 4 one-off things to do. Granted, some people are going to be more useful than others depending on the situation. The bigger problem for me is that the payoff of these battles, both in the amount of time they take and the reward, is far too low.
Yeah.
It is frustrating immediately, too. It's not even something that you recognize after a few battles or after an hour of gameplay. It's something you realize immediately after the first battle where you're like, I just gave like 5 to 6 minutes to that battle. Let's just pretend like, because it's the first time you have no idea what you're doing, like you're just figuring out the game. You're like, this took me a really long time, and the reward was a treasure chest that basically contains something random. Hopefully a good amount of gold, because you really need gold
and
in
probably
this game.
A trap of some kind.
Right, but it could be a trap too, which is no good. But like the fact that that's the payoff immediately for me was like red flags everywhere that this game is going to be a grind, and I'm going to have to try to figure something out here to make this combat more enjoyable for myself, because if the payoff is this low, I'm going to be doing these 6-minute, I would say like even on the low end, you're still looking at a 2.5-minute battle, right? Like if you don't use like the undead spell.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Right.
It's really hard not to do that, because
right.
It costs you literally nothing, and it ends the entire situation. The only reason not to do that is to give a tiny bit of experience to somebody that can't end the battle immediately. And I think that's just completely unbalanced, and it makes it harder to enjoy the game because you end up having to grind for these other characters that don't have the insta-win button. And I don't know. That was just I started getting frustrated within the first 5 battles because of that.
Yeah, it totally, completely negates anything that was like good or strategy driven about those early battles, or those like low level battles where it's like, well, yeah, especially when you start to grind, you're just. I had, of my 4 characters, they all had in like either undead or whatever the other one is that will kill
repel,
which kills living creatures like basically in one hit, or it kills a bunch of them in one hit. And I had them all equipped. It's where one of them had both, and then like 2 of them had undead, and one of them had repel, or the other way around. But and like that is the bulk of the grinding in this game if you want to get to like a decent level to beat it in the end. Which really sucks, because I do think that when you have a battle against like a higher level enemy, and it is like you do have to be a little more cerebral about it and think about it, and think about where you're going to position yourself and where you're going to how your characters are going to support each other. It's actually pretty in depth, and there's a lot of options and a lot of ways to go about the battles. But it's just if you were to do it that way every time, it would get really, really tedious really fast, and there's just an unbalance in it with these low-level spells that, like you said, don't cost anything, that will just pretty much wipe out the whole field.
And then there's the whole idea, though, of what you're trying to do with the game, right? So I can understand from a review standpoint for the three of us, right? Like, okay, this undead spell seems pretty good and I can gain experience pretty fast, so I can keep playing because this is what I want to do for the podcast, is like play on and see what else the game has to offer. But that's not a very rewarding experience. And to Joe's point, like, it is more rewarding to find out what you can do with a full team and like get in these unique situations where it's like, you know, everybody kind of working in tandem with each other. And undead doesn't always work, right? Like, there are enemies
Sure, it fails sometimes.
You know, that like won't be able to be dealt with in that way. So in the early game, like, undead is the op spell and it's really hard not to use it. But like, it's also just a problem in terms of what you're trying to get out of the game. Like, I'm sure some people will be fine to just experience the story and adventure and not care so much about the combat. I just can't help but feel like it's a missed opportunity where they built a really cool combat system where anything can happen, and now, like, 90% of that does not matter.
Yeah, well, and also, to be honest, if you are a person that just wants the story and the adventure, I think you're going to have a bad time too, because so much of this game is stuff you have to do that's not related to the story of the adventure, which is like hours of grinding. Yeah, like that. I feel like that's the person that's going to be bothered the most.
Also, I just want to state that there's barely story. Like,
just read the manual.
There's exploration. The other thing that you would want to do is explore and find cool things. But the story is the manual and a couple conversations with Lord British and a Time Lord. So you're either fighting in this grid where in the early game it just sort of it's a one-trick pony, or you're going through mazes and stuff like that.
And there's also like a surprisingly low amount of unique enemies in this game. Like, it depends on your level where new enemies start to appear, but I was kind of surprised to see in a world this big that there was maybe less than 25 enemies total in the game.
Yeah.
Of types of enemies.
Yeah. I do appreciate that. Like, it's not just a random grab bag whenever. Like, they do keep you to low levels when you're low leveled. And then, depending on your location, like, you'll find certain enemies in, like, dungeons that are different than the ones you'll find on the overworld. That are different from the ones that you'll find in the water. But yeah, it is interesting that there were so few.
Yeah, I think a good thing that would have made a lot of the grinding and the very few types of enemies and all that more forgivable would have been like a few decent boss battles. And it wouldn't even have to be like one big boss. It could be like a battle of like a bunch of things that is treated like a boss battle. You know, it's like a bunch of different enemies, but that's significantly harder, that you have to really prepare for and really think through on how you're going to beat, because otherwise it never got too challenging if you were like just prepared for the most part. I mean,
and that's why I'm saying,
go ahead.
That should just be the game, though. You're right. Like, these boss battles of different varieties of enemies, right? Like, that should have been the game, less about the grind. I understand that would completely rewrite how this game is made and the mechanics behind it, because at the end of the day, you fight to get gold, to buy new weapons, to, go explore new places. Like, there is a loop there, but it's also like how you decide to spend your money and do your things. But I feel like that's what I was arguing for in the beginning, was that combat should be a thing where, like, when you're in there, this battle counts for something. Like, it matters and there's a lot on the line. Not just like, here's 6 skeletons, fight them the cheesy way or fight them the real way. Payoff's the same to me.
Yeah, I understand that there's going to be a lot of trash mobs in an RPG, and that there's, like, especially in a game that has random battles. But I think that even if it wasn't going to be make every battle count, it would be make every battle a little different or a little more interesting. And some of that goes back to, like, maybe if your dexterity also changed the amount of times you could move in a battle or something along those lines. It could also just be that like the enemies do different things. Like I know that there's in the later game you get enemies that can do ranged attacks, but there really isn't any core difference in the way that they operate. Every enemy is just an HP sponge that has a couple different attacks. And I think that if they just added some variety to how they operate, battles could have been a bit more of a thing to look forward to than as something to just grind through.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm of, like, I feel like a rare opinion where, like, sometimes I can enjoy grinding, you know? Sometimes depend if it's done right, I think that there's, like, a satisfaction that you get out of some of those things. I mean, this game didn't do it right, but,
I can enjoy grinding when I enjoy the battle system.
Right, that becomes an optimization game.
Right. I mean, I'm thinking, right, I mean, this isn't a great example because it's an action RPG, but I'm thinking when I played Kingdom Hearts 2, I just really enjoyed, like, leveling. For some reason, there was a period of time, there was one playthrough where I just got really into, like, oh, I just want to feel that experience of, like, getting the experience points, getting the level up, seeing what I get next, and, like, feeling that payoff. I think that there's, like, a level of satisfaction to that, which, I mean, you know, I felt that a little bit sometimes at the beginning when I was playing this game, like, oh, I'm getting so much stronger or whatever, but then, like, it gets really old really fast because it's just not, there's not enough to it.
Well, let's talk about the gold system here, because I think that's what works in tandem with the combat system to make for this experience that we're all dreading as we're talking about it here. The gold that you get at the start of the game isn't even enough to equip a party of 4. You know, I think you're lucky to be able to buy 1.5 weapons, right?
Something along those lines, yeah.
Yeah. So really, it's like, for me, it was like, okay, give my ranger an actual, like, ranged weapon, so this way we can, you know, use him properly. But then also, the gold that you get from the combat is part of that grind, right? So ultimately, you're not gaining a tremendous amount of experience points and getting stronger and getting that good feedback loop of, like, I should beat up skeletons because the more skeletons I beat up, the stronger I get. Instead, it's like, I should beat up skeletons to get a chance to get gold, so that if after X amount of time, I'll collect enough gold to then buy one new weapon or one new piece of armor for one of my characters.
Yeah, it's also sort of like a quirk of the way that this game does leveling. There's a lot, like, I can't really think of how to describe the relationship between your level and your equipment, but it seems, at least in the early game, your equipment counts a lot more towards how you're going to perform than your level. And then that kind of switches around in the later game. But it is sort of counterintuitive at times like that. Like, you're fighting for different reasons than you would otherwise think if you have, like, a history in RPGs, if that's sort of what you're saying.
Yeah, like, yeah, usually you're fighting for, you know, storyline progression, right? To get to the next town or whatever, or you're fighting because, you know, you want to level up and unlock this new skill or this, or, you know, up your attack stat or something like that.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen here. You know, even for, like, the first 5 level ups, I don't know how true it is for the rest of the game. I'll admit that I did not get to the end of the game. When you level up with Lord British, when you talk to him and he offers you the level up, as far as I know, you only level up your health.
Yeah,
like, your health just goes up 100 health points. It's like, that's even, like, a shitty reward system. It's like, what do you mean? I finally did all this and now I just get 100 extra HP? I was doing fine just killing these guys with the normal amount of HP. It's my attack stat I want to boost.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that makes that difficult is you level up and, yeah, you get 100 extra AP or HP, but then all the other enemies, like, on the overworld get stronger. Like, stronger enemies appear, rather.
Yeah.
So, like,
yes.
Oh, I got more HP, but now I'm fighting, like, really hard battles, and I haven't gotten any stronger, and my wisdom and intelligence and dexterity haven't gotten any higher. So, like, you gotta, like, first of all, understand that going into it, which it doesn't make clear. Maybe it does in the manual. I don't know. But,
it doesn't. It's very counterintuitive.
Okay, yeah. So then you have to understand that going into it and then, like, prepare for that. So, like, by the time you level up, you have all the things you need to be able to take on these new threats that are going to be in, like, the main, right outside of the castle that you start the game in, suddenly there will be, like, end game level threats,
Yeah.
And that's my point, though, right? Is like, how much of your first few hours with this game were just spent in the field right outside of the main town, just grinding for something. You're not quite sure what you're doing yet, and you might want to explore a little bit, but you're not really ready to explore until you're a little more decked out with equipment. So it's like this, is this the game? Like, I just roam around this field and wait for skeletons to appear?
And that's sort of, if we're just going to go into more, like, game experience now, that's sort of how I played it in the beginning, because I tell myself this for the larger games, of just, like, I'm going to read the manual, but I'm not going to look up walkthroughs quite yet, and I'll see if, like, I can just get a handle on this. But that was how I played this game for the first few hours, of just like, okay, I'm just going to walk around. I guess I'll check out this forest. I found this cool town in a forest, but I didn't know where I was supposed to go. I'm getting these, like, one-sentence clues from some townspeople. It's like, okay, at some point, I'm going to have to, like, go to Ambrosia, whatever that means. But it was just, like, this kind of game, if you don't have... I know that there was, like, a strategy guide released around the time that this game was released. If you don't have that, this is going to take you a very long time. And the grinding is just supposed to be, like, what you do incidentally of not exactly knowing where to go. And then when I was just like, okay, I'm not playing this for 80 hours, that's when I went to a walkthrough and was like, okay, then go here and then do this. So that's sort of where I was coming from there.
Yeah, I started out, I started out just for the heck of kind of jumping in blind. I started out doing a similar thing where I just, like, explored for a little bit. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to definitely at least need to give this the same treatment I gave Zelda 2, where I kind of would, like, kind of skim through the walkthrough and then go, like, okay, I got to go to Ambrosia, or I got to go, get my dexterity up, or I got to go to Dawn. But it's like, okay, I learned what I have to do. Now I'll go do it without looking at the walkthrough. And I did that a little bit, but eventually in this, it does turn into, okay, I'm going to play this alongside the walkthrough. Like, I have to kind of go one for one what's in the walkthrough, or I'll never figure out what to do. Because, like you mentioned, Sean, that somebody mentions Ambrosia in a town.
Yes.
The only way to get to Ambrosia is to first level up to, like, at least level 5, fight pirates in the pirate ship, steal their pirate ship, which I didn't know that's how you would do it, but I actually do think that's kind of a cool way.
That's
of,
really,
like,
really
there
cool.
doesn't need to be a clue. You can just figure that out. Like, oh, maybe I can just steal the enemy pirate's pirate ship. So steal their ship and then sail to a whirlpool and go into the whirlpool, and that takes you to Ambrosia. So, like, an NPC saying you should go to Ambrosia is not really enough of a clue if I don't have any clue that if Ambrosia is a city or a place or a whirlpool in the middle of the ocean. Like, it needs to give me something to be like, oh, you should check out the whirlpool or something, even if it's more, even if it's a less obvious clue than that. But, like, give me something that I can get there without looking it up.
But, like, it's true, though. Like, after enough time, and you do get to level 5 just by, mindlessly going around fighting things for hours and hours, you'll probably come across a pirate ship, and it'll probably occur to you to try and steal it, and then will probably investigate what that whirlpool sprite thing is, and you touch it, and you end up there. So, like, and that seems like a really cool sense of, like, a discovery, like, when you finally get to these points, like discovering that you can commandeer this ship and discovering that this whirlpool takes you to this other land. Those are really cool feelings, but they just seem to be, like, they just buried by so much, like, fighting goblins and fighting orcs and in this, what we've kind of come to the conclusion of being a divisive combat system.
It needed to happen more frequently. It needed to be that is a really cool moment, like you mentioned, Sean, and I'd be impressed even if that happened right? Like that sequence of events. You steal the pirate ship, you go down the whirlpool, and now you're like, I'm in a whole new world. Like, this is crazy, right?
Yeah.
But then you get stuck in the original loop again.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait a minute, how much longer now before the next cool set piece?
Yeah.
I can't be investing hours of my life into something that essentially boils down to, like, you know, I don't want to say cutscenes, right? Because they're not. They're things that you're in control of. But at the end of the day, they really are just these set pieces that any modern game would also have for you. It would have at your disposal. So, like, yeah, that was probably a really cool thing to experience in 1989. But I don't know if it was a really cool thing in 1989 after grinding for hours to get to the point where you steal a pirate ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this might be a little bit of like a crude explanation of this, and maybe it's a little harsh, but I was going to say, like, if you take out the grinding, and you take out, like, okay, yeah, there's the grinding, there's the overworld map, there's the dungeons, and like those three things kind of all are the same. And once if you fought one low level enemy, you fought them all. If you've gone into one dungeon, like, yeah, they're different layouts or whatever, but like the dungeons are the dungeons, and then that's like 80% of the game. The other things, the unique things, like outside of those like main gameplay loop parts, I mean, are there like 8 other things in this game that aren't the main, like they're just spaced out by this giant amount of filler, and there's like 8 or 10 little like unique things?
Am
I exaggerating? That sounds about right.
No. I'd say the game is 80% these battles, and like I'm not gonna consider the dungeons to be on the same level of sort of obtrusiveness.
No, you're right. Yeah.
Because that is still like it's a new way to play the game, which we'll get to. But no, I agree with you. Like, most of this game is filler, but like that's sort of what adventuring is. Like, the adventure games are to do this loop and to try and go to new places via these sort of smaller sub games. But
yeah. Is the story they're telling here about, like, you know, steal the pirate ship, go to Ambrosia, get the Mark of the Kings, and everybody gets the Mystic Sword, talk to the Time Lord, right? Is that the be-all, end-all of storytelling? Like,
this isn't a storytelling game. I'm never... Well, no, I need to keep calling out on that.
I think I think I see your point, though, because like that's kind of what I'm getting at too. Not the story, but it's like there's your adventure is actually, there's very few things you need to do on this adventure. You have like 5 or 6 or maybe 8 or 9 tasks, and those tasks each individually will take you 20 minutes, but this game will take you 80 hours because getting from one task to another and leveling up and getting the stuff that you need is just so heavily reliant on the filler. You know, I'm not even against like random battles, which is not exactly what this game has, but like random encounters that people get like very annoyed with. I don't hate those if it's
fun.
If it does its job of making a dungeon feel precarious and making you kind of frustrated in like a way where it's like you feel really relieved when you're out of the dungeon. But they overdid it. We'll put it that way.
It's the way in which it makes you feel relieved to get out of the dungeon.
Right.
I could imagine a platformer that has these same kind of story elements, right? You know, like it's a ship level, and you're, you know, like don't fall into the water pits, and then it's the Ambrosia level, and it's like, oh, it's all weird and different than looking than the pirate ship level, and then you finally get the Mystic Sword, and now that's like a weapon that you can use to attack other than jumping. I could see those things happening in other games. I'm just saying, like, is the end vehicle here of an RPG doing anything other than making this game incredibly tedious at this point? Like, don't get me wrong, the game has a lot of interesting stuff going on in it, and you know, certainly introducing players to ideas that can't be explored in a platformer. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying at the end of the day, is this actually the worthwhile experience payoff that you're looking for in an RPG?
Mike, while we're on that point, can I read you something from Game FAQs?
Yeah.
All right. So, like, just in the thing of just like, what do we want from an RPG? Like, what even is an RPG? I'm gonna read you a review or an excerpt of a review from Ultima Exodus, written by SF Styles in 2010. He says, while story is important for an RPG, you can always get a good story from a book or movie. To me, the number one point of a good RPG game is to build your characters into powerful things and then have ways to enjoy it. And it sounds to me that, like, all this guy wants is, like, he doesn't care about the context behind why you have a character getting powerful, just that, like, you have, like, that is just the system. Like, you are getting powerful by grinding and fighting, and there's no end goal. It's just the act of building this character. And
well, it sounds like he has a god complex.
I don't know about that. I think it's just like people play RPGs for different reasons, and we play them for, I guess, a more broad reason of like we like the act of building characters, but we also like to have a reason why to build a character and like what their place is in this world that they're in. Whereas he could just be in a never-ending dungeon and probably enjoy it. And I think that's just the way people enjoy games in different ways, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Most video games don't make any sense at all when you consider how psychopathic the characters must be to murder that many people in a video game, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure this has been talked about at length, but Nathan Drake is just not a good guy. Like, he's killed thousands of people across his adventure, you know? The guy is
shooting at
probably...
him.
What's that?
They're shooting at him, you know? He's when I
know,
play
but
Uncharted,
still,
I always wait until they shoot first, and then I attack.
Every game is like that, though, right? It's like they're just like they're cold-blooded killers in all these games, and then you're supposed to believe that they're the good guys. Like, I agree that the character building is a big part of it. I would also just argue, though, that for me, Ultima Exodus, as I mentioned earlier, the payoff between moments is not that good, and the optimization can just happen early on through exploits. There is a way to play this game by forcing yourself not to take advantage of those exploits and say, I'm going to learn the system the way the game was designed, and I'm going to be the best at playing that kind of Ultima Exodus. And you can do that with your time. You are more than welcome to do that for a good portion of your life. But I don't think that, for me, the trade-off of like hours that I have available to me in my lifespan and Ultima Exodus, we're hitting a balance.
Yeah, so, and I hear what your guy is saying there, Sean. I
not
do.
My guy.
your reference is saying
that's
there.
Your ghostwriter.
Yeah, but I just don't think that Ultima Exodus has all of the elements in place to like really scratch that itch. You know, because even so, though, it's still just doing the fights over and over again and leveling up. There's not like, I don't know, there's not enough of like that really personalized character building once you get into like the grind of it.
I agree, but let me just say to Mike's point, saying that you were sort of likening exploitation to be the antithesis of what SF Styles is saying here. That is the wrong way to play the game in his eyes. But let me just read you what he says right before that line. Speaking of exploiting a game system, Exodus had a great way to do so. It was what made Exodus truly shine. It was the best way to really enjoy the game.
But by those standards, you might as well say that the best way to enjoy a video game is to actually like load the data onto your computer and change the decimals so this way all the enemies actually die on appearance.
I don't know. I really don't know.
That's showing the game who's boss. Like, look, I'm making you powerless to my abilities.
I don't know why he plays games, but I'm sure maybe some of our listeners will agree with us of Styles, but I guess I just don't get it.
Well, I mean, I do agree that the exploit is the best way to play this game. I think that speaks to the fact that like the way you're supposed to play the game was not designed really very well. Nothing wrong with a game turning out to be good because of an exploit, but I don't think that. I think even with the exploit, this game we're talking. I imagine you guys played it with the exploit as well, right?
Yeah, you kind of have to keep going. I definitely played the game normal too, but you have to exploit it at some point to continue to progress.
Well, I'll say that everything at least that I've been saying, and I do have I did really like this game in some aspects. I have a lot of good things to say about this game, but all the negative things I'm saying about this game, I'm saying with the exploit, I only played it with the exploit. So like even with the exploit, like there's a lot of
challenge
flaws
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but here's the thing about exploits in games. There is a way to make a good game that has not even like an actual exploit, but just something that's like, oh, well, this is just the game on easy mode. And it all goes back to a little game I like to call Super Mario World, all right? Where the main power-up of the cape, some people will tell you that the cape is just too powerful. You can just fly over the levels and do all your things and stuff like that. And that's true. But I was also able to respect that game enough to be like, this game is fun without the cape. Like, I want to play these levels, and I want to beat them without the cape so that I can actually, like, play them as Mario, because that part of the game is also fun. I would argue, as somebody who played with and without the exploit, it is not as fun to play this game when you're actually doing the correct way.
Yeah.
I agree.
All right, let's move on for a second, because it seems like we're getting into an agreement there. So I want to. Yeah,
we don't want to.
I want to
leave
leave an agreement. Like, I think that's good, because a lot of times on this show we just fight the whole time.
I love
let's
fighting.
agree. Let's agree to agree. Can you agree with me?
I agree.
Okay, thank you. Caves and dungeons. All right, let's talk about it. There is a different system here. It's all of a sudden a first person
dungeon
3D,
crawler.
Yeah, dungeon crawler, but like, more like with wireframe design, because there's not enough information here to really discern where you are in first person. Not that we were expecting anything amazing, but I think even games like the Goonies had more detail on their set building.
That's true.
than Ultima's offering here. But Ultima's also offering a much larger exploration than Goonies was offering. So I could understand that they're saying, well, here's the trade back. We'll give you a crazy big dungeon. We just can't make it look as pretty.
I don't know, man. So the dungeons are big. They're huge, yes. But is that like, okay, we made them look less pretty so we can make them these huge megaliths that are the same everywhere, and there's a bunch of treasure chests everywhere with the same stuff in them, and there's a couple fountains everywhere just to, like, maybe trick you or give you some water, give you some life back, and then there's going to be these random battles everywhere. Like, did it need to be that big?
Well, Sean, you fell into my trap. You fell right into my trap of, again, another thing where the developers came up with this system, right? Of let's just make it a huge adventure game where you've got this cave that's so big that you might get lost in it and lose your save file and have to start all over again, right? Like, let's really just like show people how hard it is to go, trekking through the world of Ultima. And I'm kind of like, no, pass. Like, I don't want to explore your gigantic labyrinth that could cause me to, like, soft lock my game if I'm not careful. Now, that can't actually happen, I think. No, when you die in the dungeon, correct me if I'm wrong, you just go back to Lord British, right?
Man.
Yeah. Lord British to you.
Let me say something positive about the dungeons. So we've seen this done a couple other times. What was it, Golgo 13? I feel like there were one or two others that tried to do this like 3D maze sort of thing. This, I think, I think this was the best iteration. This was the best try. Because this was the first time that I remember seeing this like 3D environment and not really ever losing my bearings. Like
there was a compass.
Yeah, was there not a compass in other games? I was trying to remember.
Well, I don't know. I think this is the only one that I really like saw. Like, oh, I'm facing north. I get it.
Right.
Like,
yeah. And I didn't get disoriented or lost in that way. Like, okay, wait, did I come from this way? Did I come from that way? Which way am I facing now? Obviously, just because there's a compass. And that made it more fun for me to kind of try and solve the maze and try and backtrack and figure out like where did I come from? Try and like map it out in my head, or maybe like write it on a piece of paper and like map out where I've been, where I've come from. But I feel like with everything this game does right, it does something that kind of hurts that like positive point. And for reasons I can't fathom, we've seen other games do this also. Most, if not all, of these dungeons require you to many times understand that a wall is not really a wall. You'll run into a dead end, or you just look to your left on the wall that you've been walking along the whole time, and at one point it's actually a secret doorway that if you walk through it, there's no wall really there, and you have to go through it. You have no idea where these secret walls are, but they're everywhere. And that makes it, that completely negates the fact that they made these like functioning mazes that I can get my bearings in, because it still found a way to make it impossible for me to really figure it out without just trying every possible tile.
Yeah. And my complaint wasn't so much that it was just as disorienting.
I know no one was saying that. But, yeah.
No, I'm not saying that you were implying that.
I'm not saying that you were implying that I was implying that.
It was just that it was featureless. And like, yeah, these secret walls are features, I guess. But if you're going to make 8 levels of a maze, maybe put some other interesting things in them than treasure chests with gold in them.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that point, too.
Yeah.
But, Joe, you mentioned there's this, for everything that's good, there's one bad. It's like, no, it's like for everything that's good, there's a lot of bad. And there is some good stuff in this game. I'm not trying to knock it. I think there is something to enjoy, and there were kind of moments where I was surprised. For instance, the first time I went into one of these dungeons, I was like, wow, it's first-person 3D. That's surprising. Shouldn't have been, considering how hard everything was up until that point. But, it's more like these things that they do right are, glimmers of light. You're like, oh, maybe they've figured it out. And then you just remember, what you're doing and how long you've been playing and what you could have been playing instead. And you have this issue that I've been having all along. But again, with the caves, why first person 3D? Why couldn't this be in 2D? It's not like it's never been done before to make 2D dungeons. Most of the NES games we play, the dungeons take place in 2D. Heck, make this one a platformer. Right now, all of a sudden, you have to use.
Stop trying to make this game a platformer, Mike.
Get the zapper. I know. Get the zapper.
No, it's fine,
get Rob.
But even the fact that, like, the dungeons are dark, right? Like, okay, makes sense, again, world building and everything like that. Who's this game for? Who's this game for?
Dungeons are dark, world
building.
Dungeons
are dark, right. No, because think about it. Like, there are some caves you go into, again, in a game like Pokemon, where it's like, only certain ones require flash. And it's like, why is that? Like, wouldn't all the caves be dark? So, this is interesting that all the dungeons are dark in this game. They chose to commit to it.
I love it.
However, it's going to require you to constantly use spells, and if you don't have the MP for it, then you have to use torches, and if you don't have that, you're just going in the dark. You need to constantly spam this stuff over and over and over again. Like, those things diminish. The spell is cast, and it's not like it's good until you leave the dungeon. It's done when it's done. Mm-hmm. So it's just another thing where it's like, I shouldn't be able to think of this many examples of things while I'm playing a game. I should be able to just enjoy the game, not saying, like, why do I want this? Why do I want that?
I don't consider that a negative, honestly. That gives me a little bit of, like, the satisfaction of, like, okay, having to prepare. Okay, I'm going to go in this dungeon. I'm not just going to go walk to the dungeon. Like, it's, I'm trying to immerse myself. So I was like, well, I better go into town and pick up some torches, and I better have some tents, and I better stock up on food, which I thought was really stupid at first. But then like as time went on, I was like, well, it's a nice little break from fighting the same enemy over and over again, and it like gives me something to like to immerse myself. Yeah, it's a little immersion. Like it gives me a reason to care that I got to a town. I'm like, oh great, I'm at a town. I can go pick up the supplies I need, which are different depending on what I'm going to do next. I mean, there's not a ton of those things, but you need torches. You might want sand if you're going to fight some high level enemies and you want to slow them down. You just got to think about like your money management in that sense too. And I actually thought that helped the immersion a little bit.
But if this is a game like Fallout New Vegas where there's like a survival mode, right? Where like, you have to eat food, you have to manage everything about yourself, and you die and that's it, right? Like if it is a survival mode game, I'm into that because the overall like game is working for me and is fun, and the idea of surviving in that world is fun. I'm not at this point, definitely. I mean, now I'm like, who knows how many hours in before I've entered a dungeon. I am not sold that I want to prepare and slog through all these additional dungeons. I don't want to do that at this point in the game. If you would have introduced that earlier, I would have maybe taken it a little more seriously. But at this point, I'm exhausted. I don't want to have to constantly cast spells and bring all this stuff and figure out like, okay, I think I already went down this corridor before 7 times. I know this is sounding like I'm whining, and I am putting on a bit of a character here, but bear with me because I think the overall point is that every new thing that happens in this game, I am left saying, well, why couldn't they just do thing I want instead? And that doesn't happen with every game we play, and it definitely doesn't happen with every bad game we play. Like a lot of games, I'll just admit, I'm like, these aren't for me, or these aren't good games, but I don't think of like alternatives. For this game, it seems like everything that I don't like, I do have an alternative answer for, and I am not saying that I am better than the people who made Ultima Exodus.
So I agree. Right? Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, I was just saying, so what is your alternative answer to the torch thing? Just not having torches and just having it be lit up the whole time?
I think there could be a torch that, when you have that torch, right? Like it's at the front of the dungeon or whatever, and you bring, you have that torch, and that's your party's torch. There's 4 of you. One person can hold the torch, and you can grab more torches throughout the cave. Like somebody had to explore those caves before you, so there must be. They're not really like caves. They are,
well, sure, yeah, they're dungeons,
layered dungeons that have like stuff inside them. So clearly people have been there. So I don't think if that's the answer, I would actually say I'd go back to my 2D response of like, I don't see why these dungeons even have to be in first person. But, I think the realism is again great. Like I've been saying that this whole time of like, who is this game really for? And the fact that they give you all these choices is undeniably a decision that they've made. They want you to feel like you're in control of everything that happens. I guess I've just had it. I don't like. I'm submitting the control. I'm like, I'm done.
So here's where I'm gonna try and bridge the gap here. I agree that without these diminishing resources like food, like torches, not so much like MP, because all you have to do is spin around in a circle and then you can cast light again. But without that, it sort of makes the dungeons feel a little less harrowing. What I would say, though, is that these specific things that you are preparing for, because preparation is a huge concept, and it's a really big part of this game. It's just the way that it was executed, and unlike Mike, I don't really know how you could go about it without just removing these features that would make this feel less like of a claustrophobic environment. But there just should have, if they did it in a different way, if like it was, if it was just a little more forgiving, like if you did run out of torches, there could be some way to find some more while you're still like lost in the dark. I don't know. But it is tedious in its current form, and I'm not, I guess I'm just not eloquent enough to put it in a way Mike just says that he's kind of done. I don't have anything better to say than that, too.
I mean, I will say that, I definitely don't think that this is the best and most interesting, like, types of preparation they could put in their game. But I do think that having it is better than not having it. And I actually still do sort of think that, like, it shouldn't be more forgiving. Like, if you didn't bring enough torches or don't have a spell, then, like, yeah, you should, there should be a consequence where it's like, oh shit, I'm gonna die here.
It should definitely be
detrimental.
Like, yeah, but yeah, you're right. I actually agree with you there. Yeah, I think for me, it's just like the overall, it's still pretty shallow. I want more in depth versions of that, or more stuff to do that with, if that's going to be like the direction the game goes. But I do think, yeah, I don't know, just taking it away, I feel like makes it less interesting for me. But I guess it's just a preference as well.
There should be rats that just like they run across your feet and they give you a disease, and then it's just like you have to get back to the hospital before. Well,
that sort of does happen. I mean, you open a chest and you get a disease, and you have to get back to the hospital.
I think that's funny because that happened on my very first playthrough of the game. One of my characters caught a cold.
Yeah, caught a cold from the first chest.
I couldn't find a fountain, so I was like, I'm dead. Like, this is, I have to reset the game. I don't know where a fountain is, and that's the only way to cure a cold, apparently. So,
I think you can go to the hospital.
You can go to the doctor. Yeah. You silly goose.
I didn't go to the doctor, so I just reset that game and didn't get a cold until later on after that. But I think that's so funny that, like, my first experience with this game was getting a cold, and I'm like, oh, you want to be more real? The rats give you the plague, and you have to escape the cave before you die.
Hey, I mean, that's somebody's game.
Well, something that is sort of on the same page as what we're talking about is the way that your character dying is detrimental also. It's not like, oh, I'll use a quick revive, or I'll run to the Pokemon Center and and heal my party. Yeah. And I, because of how much of a pain it was, I really, really fought very hard to not let any of my characters ever die. Like, after like one or two, and I switched to new characters. Once I had the characters I was going to use for the rest of the game,
very expensive.
I was like, yeah, do not let the characters ever die. Always make sure they have enough food. Always heal, and make sure that they're all like high levels. And I succeeded for most of the game. I got to the point where I had everything you needed. There's a lot of like errands to run before you can go into the final dungeon or the castle. And I got everything I needed, and I was the last thing I was getting, there's some cards you have to get in Ambrosia. I was getting those. I got those final ones, and 3 of my characters died because I realized I had to run out of food, and I was like, oh shit, like, I got to get back to town fast before my 4th character dies. So I use you get like these heart compasses that transport you back to the main town. I use that. I get in there. I get some food real quick to give to my remaining character, but I have no money left because I just spent it all on upgrades in Ambrosia. So I have to go. This is a really long story, sorry, but I have to go and fight with my one remaining. I have to fight with my one remaining character as much as I can to get enough money to revive people, because it costs, I think, 500 gold. Then I go to the doctor to revive. First time I've ever tried it.
Fails.
And he says, no, it doesn't fail. He says, I'll see what I can do. And then he comes back and says, you took too long. Yeah, you look too long, John, or no, Matt. They're all named after people I know too. Matt, my archer, is like, you took too long. Matt has turned to dust. And there's no reviving him. This character I just spent like 40 hours building, and you just can't get him back.
Oh, you
I had to go to an older save. Thank God I didn't save it after he had died. But then I was like, now I gotta do all this shit again? Like,
I'm not speaking from experience, but I'm speaking from somebody else's experience, that you have to go to some place and, like, go to a temple, and they can turn them from ash back into person.
Oh, I didn't know that. I really thought that it was like, what's the, how long?
But that's like 900 gold. So.
Jeez. And like, how long does it take for them to turn to, like, how long do you have to get to the hospital?
I have no idea. I that's why I see it as like the doctor failed, because I think it's RNG, whether it works or not. But maybe it's a time limit.
Well, he still took my money, so I couldn't even try it again.
Yeah, he still took your money. That's like, it's medical malpractice. It's like, whatever. You still got a bill to pay.
That was the most frustrating experience I had playing this game. And there were a lot of others, but that was definitely because I was ready to go face the final challenge. I was ready to go beat the game, I thought. I mean, it probably wasn't.
That is still a cool story, though.
Yeah, I got that out of it. There is story to this
moment
game.
Moment of clarity, okay? I just want to let everyone know that everything Joe has been talking about for a while now are all awesome features, and he's right to be excited about them. I'm not arguing that these are unique features in this game and that they're all good and stuff like that. The argument I've been making for a while now, and I just want to make it as clear as possible, is that this game has lost its good faith from me. Like, I'm done with it. At this point, I can't hide it anymore that I'm not going to have a good time. And now it's like, again, the preparation thing. If this was Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and you had to prepare for a cave or that island, right? Where like they strip you of everything and now you're in this island and you have to just like regain everything. Like, that's such a cool moment in that game, but I'm there for it because I'm there for that game. I'm not here for this game, so when it tries to do something cute and new, all of a sudden I'm just angry. I'm just angry that it's like another new thing that I have to deal with. Like you were talking about, Joe, with the with party members dying. It's like, that's a really deep system that they've created here of like, death is somewhat permanent, and who knows if you're even going to be able to get them back. And then even if you can't get them back, then you have to do Sean's method of going to a temple and reviving them. Like, that could take who knows how many hours and who knows how much time. And we could debate whether it should take that many hours and that much time, or if there's just like a faster way to do it that would still make the effect really cool. What I'm saying is like, that mechanic in the scheme of this game, like this game's scope is just so large, and it's offering you so much, but the problem is that nothing really syncs with each other in this game. There's so many things that are fighting me at all times to make me not want to continue to play the game, that ultimately I can't enjoy the systems because they're all kind of working against you to make sure that the game itself is harder.
I think, like, I kind of see what you mentioned it before too. It seems like the negative consequences of a lot of things sort of outweigh the positives that come out of playing the game correctly or well. So that, like, for every step forward, you feel like there's two steps back. And it just, that sort of, that reward and punishment is just out of balance. Right?
Yeah, I'm with you on that too. I mean, even with what I was just complaining about with the death thing, now knowing, I mean, I think if my character was gone forever, I probably would not ever really be able to like think that was a good system. But now knowing that there is a way, and it seems like even more of a pain in the ass to get him back from ashes and go there, I don't think that that's terrible. If I were enjoying the rest of the game enough to want to do that, I think that would be okay. If the positives were up there with that negative, then it feels like, okay, I got to go on this journey to get my characters back. It's like a whole nother game now to get my characters back. Cause like, is it worth it? And that whole thing. But yeah, you're right. It doesn't. All it does for me is make me cringe at the idea of spending like that many more hours grinding just to get the money I need to get my characters back.
Yeah.
Like, if the loop was more fun, then I would enjoy it more.
And let's talk about management. The gold, the food, just weapons and armor, like how you manage your team throughout the game. The first thing that I had to do right away was transfer all my gold to one character because I couldn't stand having when you're shopping and they're like, who's making the purchase and then who is it for? Like it's like, just put the first character, everybody give him all the money, and then we'll just... No, seriously, and then this way he's like in the front of the party, he collects the money, and then he's just like our banker for the system.
Yeah, that's what I did too.
It's a little strange, though, right? It's a little strange that gold even has to be, like, you're a party of 4. It's another, D&D thing that they're sticking to where, like, everybody has their own gold and they can spend it how they want, but you're all 4 characters in this scenario. Like, you're not, you're not playing with 3 other people.
I think that the proper way to play this game... The proper way to play this game might be with the 4 people and hand the controller back and forth between each of you, and you each control one character and make all those
That's
decisions.
really funny.
No,
that's funny though because that would make the combat sections even longer. It would make the whole game it would make everything so much longer because you have to. It's crazy that we talked about combat maybe like an hour ago now. But we just said that they don't let you move and they don't let you attack in the same turn, and that was it. But I need to let the viewers know, that is frustrating. That is so
such
crazy.
A huge thing. But
you move and then you done. That's your turn, and then God forbid, what if you there's something where you can accidentally choose. You press a button and then you no longer get the option to move.
If you make the wrong input, it's just that's your turn then. You just press the skip turn button.
You made a mistake.
And if you open a menu, or if one of the menus, you open the menu and you're like, oh no, I want to back out of that menu. It's okay, you can back out of that menu, but you're not doing anything else. We'll move on to the next character. It's weird.
Right.
Why you're allowing me to back out of the menu? Let me have my turn still.
But yes, Mike, on the topic of managing resources, this game should have just had a party coin purse and a party inventory, so you don't have to deal with hot swapping money and all this very minute, tedious stuff that really it's not necessary at all. I'm just surprised that they put it in the game at all.
Well, because think about it, if that character dies, then their money's gone too. But that's not how that would work.
I think you've got their ashes. You've got their ashes still. I think you can take the money off of them.
Exactly.
Well, I can confirm because I had 2 and eventually 3 dead characters that you can take things from dead characters.
So it's there. Even that risk of punishment isn't even it should have just been a party inventory system.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that anyone can say to say that it makes sense this way as a one-player game.
What I think it boils down to is that they were creative enough to find ways to put all of these elements from Dungeons and Dragons into a video game, but they weren't creative enough to recognize the things that should change from a tabletop RPG into a one-player video game. And they left too many of those things exactly the same, as close to the way that they would be done in
they're taking them as givens.
Yeah.
I get it. But
well,
no.
If you think about it, right? No, it's true. If you think about it, that's what Final Fantasy excels at, right? It was also based off of Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, some of the enemies are right from the books, so it's interesting that they were able to be okay, well, we have to adapt this thing. Maybe they were just afraid of being sued, but they were we have to figure out a way to make this a video game. I think that's a great point, Joe. Is they decided to just do the best translation of Dungeons and Dragons without thinking about why it might not work. And given that this is the 3rd entry, I'm really interested to know what was the bare bonesness of the 1st and 2nd one? What does this one feature improve?
So I think the first 2, on the PCs or the computer versions of the first 2, are more of that first person, turn-based, typical of what we think of as Final Fantasy, of that just take turns attacking each other. There's no spatial component to battles. I think all maybe the resource stuff is all the same. I didn't play them, but I was looking at some of them, and the battle system at least is much more akin to what I was expecting out of this game.
It's even weirder actually, because that's they decide it was a new idea for them to try and make it more like Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know. I guess that makes sense. They were trying a new thing, but it's weird that they didn't I don't know. It's weird that they came up with the idea of making everything so much more one-to-one with Dungeons and Dragons rather than having gotten more experience in making video games and realizing what works for video games.
I mean, I still think that, like, moving around in combat works. I mean, I love playing
That's true.
XCOM
Right,
and Fire Emblem and stuff like that. It's just that they did it wrong. So
Right.
it's just an experimentation. I don't blame them for doing it, but it did hurt the product.
All right, so let's get back to that thing that I keep saying, like, all right, man, maybe we'll have this conversation. Let's have this conversation, okay? Who is this game for? It's definitely not for Bobby, your 7-year-old cousin who's going to Toys R Us and he sees this game and he's like, this one, right? It's like, that's a mistake. Like, should have bought Super Mario Brothers, kid. You're in for a world of hurt now. Who is this game for when it comes to the NES? Obviously, like, computer gamers were a breed of their own back then. So was this game obtuse on purpose?
I don't think it was obtuse on purpose. I think that Bobby could be a prospective RPG player. Like, this is like what would have introduced him to this wild world of choice and consequence that RPGs are, or at least like Western RPGs are all about. I think that we see all of these faults and like all of these terrible systems. But what Bobby, and I love that we've just created this straw man here. Bobby just sees this land of this land of adventure where he can steal a pirate ship and choose who gets to hold the money and talk to the people and go to the bar and talk to the bartender. Like that's the experience that this kid is seeing, or somebody that really enjoyed this game back then is experiencing. We have played so many RPGs that have expanded on combat and expanded on choice and consequence and immersion that we are really only seeing all of these terrible dungeon designs and this clunky inventory system and this sort of kneecapped battle system, where I think that's just what we get for being exposed to the modern RPG.
Yeah,
I think Bobby was their target audience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's almost exactly what I was going to say about like it being a game for, maybe they were trying to make it a game for Dungeons and Dragons fans, but I think they ended up making a game that was the gateway for people to like get into that kind of world, that were to try to get into like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. And yeah, I do think in 1989, there's a different approach to like looking at this game, and I think that like the right person really enjoys this game in 1989.
Yeah, I totally agree. I agree with that. The right person enjoys this game. I just am worried that the right person wasn't really on the NES, and I imagine that most people who favored this game played it on like an Apple II. I do like I like everybody's responses here because they all check out. I think there's no wrong answer here other than saying me. The game is definitely not for me. But that's also like, that's a thing too. You can enjoy systems within a game. I certainly did. Even the little details in this game, right? Like there's the phases of the moon included in the HUD, and it's like I just appreciate that being there. It's like it adds. I know that it's like not that complicated, and it just like tells you, like depending on the cycles of the moon, like magical portals open up and stuff.
Yeah.
But to me, that just adds a lot of mystery and intrigue.
Absolutely.
And the game has a lot of that going for it, and that was the stuff I really liked about it. It's funny. It's like when you reveal like what the game is after the fact, right? So let's pull the curtain here for a minute. And after I play these games, I do an extensive amount of research on these games too, to make sure that we can give the listeners, the correct info, but also like a substantial amount of info. And there is a difference between playing this game for 5 hours, playing this game for 20 plus hours, and then like also seeing this game via research by looking at maps and looking at strategy guides and reading old reviews and stuff like that. It's like the idea of a game that has such a tremendous scope, while at the same time, disappointing on delivery. There's something about that I couldn't get over as I continued to play and research the game. It just felt like such a missed opportunity here.
I think we're the kings of being in love with ideas that that a lot of the games that we've been reviewing have been presenting to us, and just being disappointed by the execution of them. I think that's just sort of that's just games in general.
Right. Yeah, I agree. That feeling of going in the whirlpool and discovering ambrosia after that weird, vague line, right? Mm-hmm. That's not helpful at all. It's not helpful. Yeah. You have no idea what he means. But then when you get there, you're like, oh, wow, this is really cool. And you don't know what could happen in that other world. Like, maybe the rest of the game takes place there. Who knows? I like that sky's the limit thing. I hate when I actually feel limited by the game, because the game is very imaginative. It does offer a lot of unique systems and opportunities to experience, but then there's all these other things in this game that I don't want to do.
I agree. I agree with both of these viewpoints.
Let's talk magic. We really only talked about the undead spell, which is kind of funny because there is a whole magic system, and there's also like what kind of character you are is what kind of magic you get too. Like, the wizard, the cleric, who am I forgetting? The alchemist, the ranger have some.
Paladin? No.
Okay, paladin? No, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
But anyway, yeah, a lot of different characters get magic, and they have different kinds of magic spells that they could have at their disposal. I think the wizard is the only one who has the opportunity to potentially learn everyone else's spells as well as their own. I'm not sure exactly.
Wait, I thought the wizard only learned
only black magic, intelligence magic.
Oh, really? The wizard can't learn like cleric spells?
And then the cleric is like the white magic version of the wizard.
Got it. Okay. I don't know. Because I didn't experience this in my game. I just read it. But okay, that's good to know. So that would be the difference between those two, though. White magic, black magic. Got it. So
and then
one's like the
all of these all of these other magic users are just some variation of like some of them can do both. Some of them can do only one, but not to the level of like those pure classes. But they have a bit more like standard attack power, the cleric and the wizard are like the pure magic users on either end
right.
of those.
I'm sorry, I remember now. Yes, it's magic power and willpower. That's the difference between these guys.
For the most part,
like, the cleric has but I'm saying like the willpower is their version of white magic in this game.
I mean, they still draw from MP, right?
Yeah.
So there's intelligence and then wisdom. I guess will would be wisdom and magic would be intelligence.
Yeah, and I think like a wisdom based, like a cleric whose magic is based on wisdom. The higher your wisdom level is, the higher MP you have. But I think if you were
spells are available to you.
Yeah. But then if you were to do a wizard and give him higher intelligence, it doesn't raise your MP because he works on intelligence rather than wisdom.
Yeah, wisdom on a wizard does nothing.
Yeah.
And what do you think of that? Is that like a waste? Is that like designed as a funny throwaway that you should know that? And if you attribute character points to the wizard,
I actually hadn't
like that's just your fault.
I hadn't really thought about the fact that it's a waste. That like he has the ability to get these attributes that don't do anything for him.
It's entirely it's fully brought over from like tabletop RPGs. Like if not so much because like if you have a fighter that has like a wisdom skill, like they still have things that they can do with wisdom. Like if you were to give a fighter or a barbarian any intelligence or wisdom, that is a throwaway. You're just dumping points because they can't use magic.
We've done extensive stuff on combat, management, dungeons, exploration. Now it's time for the NPCs and the towns, kind of like where you find out about your questing and what you'll do next if you're lucky enough to decipher what they mean. Right off the bat, the only thing that, and I should just be able to get over this because it's the limitations of the console itself, but it is kind of interesting how they display the town, right? Like they can't show you the entire screen all at once. Some of the tiles don't generate until you get closer to them. That was a little weird.
I think
really
you missed
liked
something.
That.
Yeah, I think I thought that was actually like one of the most impressive things about this game because that's your line of sight, right?
Yeah.
You only the black tiles are just things you can't see. So if you're and it does it pretty accurately. If you're in front of something, like a doorway, you'll see like a wedge from the doorway looking out of the doorway, but you can't see directly to the sides of like the walls. It does it on the overworld too, where it covers things that your characters wouldn't be able to see.
That's fun, right? But it's like it's weird in 2D. Like those aren't my eyeballs. I can see that,
I guess, but it's trying to immerse you in like what this you're that character. So like, yeah, you're seeing his perspective, but like, you're right. It is an element that they should have probably implemented some things that are hiding somewhere or stuff that you can't see around a corner. But the only time that would happen happens in like the dungeons, which are 3D anyways. But I still was very impressed with the fact that they made it work so well. Like, yeah, it would be nice if there was stuff like hiding in the areas you can't see or something. But
this is still like a system that is used in like CRPGs today, like the isometrics. Like you will have a line of sight that when you move around, things will appear to you, and like that fog of war needs to be sort of cleared. And I think that while it isn't as well implemented as it could have been, like you said, Joe, there are still like hidden things around. Like there's a casino in a town that's like hidden around a corner. Like when you're walking around the castle, there are some places that you sort of have to explore to find. That in any other, if it was just like the screen is just the screen and you see past walls and stuff, like that could have sort of spoiled your exploration of it. Just be like you just move over a couple pixels and oh there's that other thing. So I think it's not a perfect implementation of it, but I think that it did add to the experience of the game.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about stuff like that. And I know we're talking about the towns right now, but even on the overworld map, that line of sight thing, like mountains block towns. Yeah. You have to go around the mountains to then see like what's over there and stuff. And it did make it so you can't just know exactly where to go just by looking at like the screen. You have to actually go where your character would have to go in order to see these things.
And I think that makes sense. Like I do like the line of sight thing, and I actually didn't know that that's something that's still implemented in CRPGs. It's kind of, I'd like to try it on a new isometric style game, because to me it was just disorienting being in
when it's just these blocks,
being like top down.
Weird.
Yeah, exactly. Like the fact that there's not enough graphics to like convey that well, and it looks more like a loading error to me. I'm glad you guys appreciated it, but to me it looked more like that feature in Super Mario Brothers 3 where like you can see the last line of pixels behind you as well. It's like, okay, they have to do that.
It definitely fell into that too. But yeah.
Yeah, I thought the same thing when I first saw it.
My gripe is not with the towns themselves. I want to be clear. I actually thought the towns were pretty fun to explore and just like wander around, because that was the real world building and storytelling, right? Like it wasn't really happening on the overworld. It was happening in these towns. And like Sean mentioned, that hidden casino and stuff like that, like that builds some character into a game that was needing it. So I appreciate all that stuff. I just couldn't get over the
presentation,
the visual disparity
of
of like, okay, I have eyes, they have eyes, our eyes are not looking at the same thing. So why am I limited?
I think that the towns themselves had a good amount of character. Like there's one that's basically a forest, and it doesn't look like the rest of them. the individual NPCs definitely do sort of like there are many copies of them in each town. Like I kept coming across this little girl that kept telling me not to forget about her, which I thought was kind of creepy. But other than that, I think this is pretty robust for this age.
I'll say that I do agree that the towns, like there were a couple of unique ones with like there was the forest town that was kind of cool, but as far as like the functionality of the towns, not all of them, but a lot of them felt not different than any of the other towns. You know what I mean? Like they felt like it didn't mean too much to get to a new town. Yeah, like no, visually and functionally. Like I'd go into a town and I'd be like, oh great, I'm in a new town. I can buy mostly the same things in most of the towns. There are some exceptions, and I can rest up. But there was not like, I don't know. I like to equate things to Pokemon because it's for like most people that's like a common ground for a lot of people. So like in Pokemon, I'll be like, okay, I need to go to the move deleter. So like that's Blackthorn City, and I know Blackthorn City because it's this. But like, okay, now I got to get this item, and I got to go to this Lavender Town, which is like a ghost town. There's all these ghost references and all this other stuff. Whereas this just felt like, okay, so there's that town to the west, and it's got a name, and it's a town, and it does all the things that the town does. And there's a town in the south, and it's got a name, and it does all the things that towns do. And there were like one or two exceptions. There was like Dawn, which you have to use the Moon Gate to get to it. You can get more really powerful weapons. And yeah, there was the forest town. But for the most part, I was always like, okay, I just need to get to I got to rest up. I got to get to a town. Like, it's really the only thing I ever use towns for.
Yeah,
restocking.
I agree. But I would say that, like, while they aren't as unique as like a Lavender Town, or like just towns in RPGs that have...
Yeah, even like Final Fantasy.
Like towns that have like unique landmarks. Like, it does not have that. But they do have different configurations of like what is available. Like some places don't have a weapon/armor shop. Some places don't have a bar. Some places don't have a grocer. So like depending on what you need, you do still need to think about like which town is the nearest that can accommodate you, because they're like the nearest one may not have what you need. They'll always have an inn, but other than that, I think that it's sort of a random grab bag of what's available.
Yeah, in what true. World does the town not have a grocer?
I'm not saying okay, we got to go to realistic.
I know, I'm just saying, like that's a problem though, right? Like I get like, you know, these guys only sell this kind of armor, and if you want this armor, you should go to this town. Like, fine with that. That all checks out for me. But, you know, this is the kind of game where I was honestly only expecting one town, and that's the challenge, right? Like, you always have to go back to the first town. Like, you could imagine something like that happening. I'm glad they didn't do that. But, you know, there is something strange about necessary things to press on and not having those available to you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say that because of my eventual reliance on a walkthrough, that I probably did miss out on whether or not there was a good, like, I don't know, you guys tell me, was there a good, like, level of using NPCs to kind of gather data and figure out what to do next? Or the couple times I would talk to random NPCs, I would get, like, very little to no information, but then I kind of stopped doing that.
I'd say that if you're using a walkthrough, like, a lot of the stuff that comes through... That's related to like digging up, like I forget what the thing, the horn, or like the sword. Like if you were to then talk to a bunch of NPCs, you'll get hints on like how to do that. Like a lot of them do give like compared to other games, relatively valuable hints. But if you're using a walkthrough, you're probably not going to run into that.
Right. Well, I mean, I can't even imagine a hint that would come up in one of those however many character text boxes that gives me any information that would help me get like the mystic armor, which is on like a random island in a random unmarked spot. That you have to
I'm not saying that it's very
how
specific.
Would I know that?
Yeah.
It's the mystery of it, though. It's you know, it's some of it's flavor text. you hear about something and then they want you to just kind of like search for it from there on out, you know?
Yeah, try and figure. Yeah, I get that.
I guess at this point, we've kind of come to the agreement that fans of this game will appreciate that was done rather than, you know, this random woman in town happens to have very specific information about where you should go next. Like, it seems like fans of this game would hate that because that's the walkthrough, right? Like, why would she know where this thing exactly is?
That's why I feel like there's a happy medium. Plus, there's a level of like I think my expectations also stem a little bit from like more, not even modern games, but like later games than on the NES, where it's like, oh, there's like conversations there's actually a story being told, and I can figure it out based on the story. I can figure out where to like guess, where to start guessing, like educated guesses based on the story, rather than where it's here where it's just like a vague hint that like you would take hours and hours of just guesswork to figure out what they're talking about. I don't even know if that's how it was. That's just how I was imagining it, because most of the people I spoke to were like, welcome to Montour West, or like, don't forget about me, or like, go to Ambrosia. And I'm like, what? Like
I didn't even know that Mondane died.
Did you guys go to the hospitals to give blood to get gold?
I tried once, and all party members were too close to death to be any use, so I just decided not to.
Yeah, I think you have to be pretty close to full health, if not full health, to like really use the system. But what was I gonna say? That's like a good way to get some gold, because you know that your blood, like in real life, stuff's valuable. So sell your blood. Like, this game could just be you living in a town, never really like, just trying to like make days meet at the inn. You're just like, okay, I don't have a place to stay, I gotta sleep at the inn. I'm gonna go fight some skeletons to get enough gold to then sleep at the inn for the day, and oh shit, I didn't fight enough skeletons today, gotta go give some blood.
That's typical.
Also, that's pretty advanced doctors for like, they're doing blood transfusions, or like,
no, they just want
like
the blood.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, maybe, yeah, that's true. Maybe there's some spell that they use it for.
Maybe it's like Exodus hates blood, and you're just trying to get away. Like, they're like, oh, we're gonna make circles around the whole town with your blood. Exodus, by the way, not the character on the box art, not that devil Satan-like character. Exodus is a giant. Well, it's actually, I was gonna say machine, but they describe it in the manual as neither human or machine. So
I thought it was the island. I thought the island was Exodus.
Right. I guess it's just like it's an ominous thing. Like it's like you can't really describe it, right? Is it the island, or is it like the spirit
presence
within the
maybe.
island? The presence, yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I guess I read the manual once and then just played the game. So
Exodus is the creation of Minax and Mundane, who I think are actually
Ultima 1 and 2, yeah.
Yeah, Ultima 1 and 2, that's also really cool. Like, all of a sudden, that's some pretty cool stuff for a game I've been ragging on. Like, the idea that it's not a man or a machine, it's a presence, and that it was created by the villains of the previous two games.
But again,
it's like,
that's our words. That's not the game. I don't know if it's a presence.
Yeah, is it just like a place?
I thought it was just
I like the idea that I'm going to start like dramatizing things that I'm talking about. I'm talking about like my water bottle. I'll tell someone like it's neither human nor machine. Like, it's just like anything that's not human or machine. It's just like the grass is not human nor machine.
That's right. Exodus was a water bottle. I forgot about that.
Is a water bottle technically a simple machine? Like, it's a container?
Nah, it's just a thing.
I don't think so. Yeah,
okay. I mean, it's screwed. There's a lid that screws on. That's kind of the
bottle itself.
I don't know who beat the game here, but it's important to mention that Exodus does not like challenge you to a fight. To defeat him, you have to like solve a bunch of puzzles that he's set up for you. I didn't do it, but that sounds pretty fun and stupid for like the end of a game where like the whole thing was you grinding combat, and now it's like, solve a bunch of puzzles if you want to beat me. It's like,
it's really not even solve the puzzle. It's like, just write down what the Time Lord said to you and then do that. And then you walk out, and I think the island falls into the sea. Oh, we're spoiling the game. And then it cuts to credits.
The old Banjo-Kazooie fairy godmother route. Got it.
No idea what that means,
Classic.
but I agree.
Right before Exodus, you also have to fight the floor.
The floor?
Yeah, it's just
The floor is lava?
I assume that there's actually like characters there that just are the exact same sprite as the repeated tile of the floor.
Is that what happened?
Is that what that is?
I'm confused.
Yeah, there's like
It's
a
really
battle where it
happening.
looks like nothing's there, but there's a bunch of enemies you can't see because they are the floor.
Wow, I did not get to this part.
I didn't either. But I
Joe,
saw
I
it.
like your explanation, but I don't think it's true. I think you are quite literally fighting the floor, from what I understand of the Ultima Wiki.
Well, I my explanation was more of what I thought was like technically what the game was doing.
Oh,
like, I think
gotcha.
There's
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
like
that's
six
probably how-
enemies that are like just the same tile as the floor.
Yeah, because you do have to fight specific spots. You can't just like be like, get on your hands and knees
Yeah.
and strike
Are
this
we
thing.
sure it's
Like,
not ghosts? Like maybe it's just invisible things?
It's called floor.
It's called
the
floor.
wiki was pretty
All right,
clear.
whatever.
It's also I watched somebody beat it, and I think like the name of the enemy. Did the enemies have names? I can't remember. But for some reason,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
knew
they
it was
had
floor
names.
also. Yeah.
I would like to see like this campaign actually ran as like a D&D module where the DM has to say like how like describe how you're attacking the floor and how the floor is attacking you. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's pretty funny because now you're making me guess. Like, was it the floor or was it invisible enemies? Like, theoretically, like, there is no
I love
wrong
how
answer,
much
right?
we've been stuck on this floor thing.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like you're like slowly losing your mind as you're Mike.
Well,
as
it's
you're
just
saying,
like, who
was it
thinks
the
that
floor or was
is
it
a good final boss?
I know.
Well, second, the penultimate boss. But, like, I don't know. I never expect the floor, but I guess that's no different than that hand in Legend of Zelda that will grab you if you're handmaster or whatever and they're not looking at you. It's bizarre. But it's this giant hand that just comes down from the ceiling. It's crazy creepy. But, that's also, like, who thought of that?
I think
Like, that's
hand
weird.
works better
So,
than floor.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's true.
yeah, maybe.
The floor is Exodus.
You were the floor. You've been the floor the whole time. One last thing I want to explain is that we keep referencing this exploit that apparently we all used to make the game a lot easier, and I feel like maybe we should just let the listeners know exactly what that was to kind of get a better handle. So
No, that's the mystery. We're the NPCs of this game.
right. Well, the NPCs don't talk about the exploit. That's
Be funny if they did, though.
but basically you can't get your pirate ship. You can't steal a pirate ship, I think, until level 5.
Yes.
You're level 5.
Correct.
But once you get past level 2, from that point on, every time you go up levels, you're going to get harder and harder enemies, and that's when the game gets like really, really difficult. So what the exploit is, and why I had so many party members, but also it wasn't the only reason I had so many party members, but you make like a sacrificial party. You get enough money and experience to level them up to level 5, go get your pirate ship, and then as soon as you have the pirate ship, go save, restart the game, and I don't know if you have to delete those characters. I did, but you might not even have to, but I delete those characters and get new, fresh level 1 characters. All the enemies on the screen go back to being like level 1, and no enemies will appear in the water, which the game intends for you to run into enemies in the water, because by the time you can get the ship enemies, you're at a high enough level where enemies appear in the water. So the game stays very easy, but you have access to, not very easy, but the game stays easy and you have access to everywhere in the game. Definitely not the way it was intended, but I honestly can't imagine enjoying playing it the way it was intended.
It also adds a lot more grinding than we ever needed to, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, you mean if we had not done the exploit?
Well, I think it balances out with like not running into those other creatures and having the rest of the game be easier, but it's still like it's more grinding before you can do your thing. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah.
But so from what I didn't test this to see how true it was, but from what I was reading in the guide that gave me the idea for this exploit, it was saying that, like, trust me, it takes way less time to max out your level when you're at level 1 and fighting low level enemies than fighting high level enemies that have higher experience rewards but take way longer than
I see.
than it would take
Yeah.
to. So they were, that, and like I think there was one other source that said like it's going to take you way longer to play this game if you do it the right way.
Yeah, I think all speed runs take advantage of that too, and it's just it's funny because like you saying that we didn't talk about it, Joe, is just it's like one of those things where we just assumed.
Yeah, it's like that's like, the game. The other way is
but
the
also,
weird
like,
way to play the game.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the way to play the game, but also like, do you want people to know the exploit? Should they decide that on their own? Like, there's so many things around this, but it's like I can't think of any other example like this because it's not really like a cheat code, and it's not really like a mechanic that was intended. It's it's not quite like the warp zone worlds in Super Mario Brothers where you're like, oh, don't tell people about that. They have to discover that on their own. Like, I don't know how to feel about the exploit system other than knowing that like all three of us, without talking to each other, felt it necessary to use it.
Right.
I think it's just like one of those things everybody decides at some point while they're playing this game, like, maybe I want to do this instead. Like, maybe I want to find a way to play this game a little bit easier.
Right. And there are exploits in other games that, that ruin the challenge of the game. In this game, I think the exploit makes it a better game.
So, there are 9 numbered Ultima games. We technically played the third one, but they struck the 3 out of it. And I say 9 because 7 was split into 2 parts. It was Ultima 7 Part 1 and Ultima 7 Part 2. So that's technically just like the same game, but we'll just say 9. The last of these games was released in 1999.
Wow.
That's pretty crazy. It's been like an absence of Ultima for two decades now.
Yeah, I mean, I know that like Ultima is like one of those founding RPG series, and it spawned genres like Ultima Underworld. Pretty much created like what would become like the first person RPG and like the immersive sim. And then you got Ultima Online, which was it the first MMO? I don't quite remember.
No, I think that wasn't that EverQuest.
Maybe it was EverQuest. I'm not sure, but it has a legacy. But it's crazy that I had no idea that there were no newer ones, or at least in this century.
Well, since you brought up Ultima Online, I want to share 2 really funny stories that because it's Ultima, it's an Ultima episode, might as well. Online games, MMOs, they have a fandom behind them, and there's a lot of different rules, and Ultima likes to pride itself on the systems it creates and just sticking to those systems. So long before they invited players into the game, they were creating this world that like had a vegetation system.
I know
and,
this
like,
story.
Animals, and the creators of the games had no idea that the player base would just kill everything.
Destroyed the ecosystem.
Whether it was like, right, exactly. Just like, I want to kill all the bears, whether they attack me or not. And in doing so, by killing like, anything, that happened to Rome, they destroyed the vegetation system in the game. And therefore it was like, okay, now we actually can't have this system because these are necessary things that need to survive. So after like trying to like combat it by like fixing spawn points and doing stuff like that, eventually they just had to just scrape the whole system and start a new one that just was like, these things will just spawn regardless of anything, like they don't need to reproduce. They don't need to have these things living around them. They'll just happen. So I thought that was pretty fun.
I love it because like the game never needed that, but it was, I right. love when games have these systems for very tertiary reasons. But I guess that also explains why we can't have nice things. And
it's like, relevant to Ultima 3, It's like, there's so many things in this game that's like, I'm not a fan of it, but hey, it's there, and they chose to include those things as like, systems that somebody could use to potentially exploit or to immerse themselves further. There's a lot of like optionality in playing both Ultima 3 and MMOs, so I see the parallel. Now, Lord British, okay, who is the creator of Ultima's, that's his in-game alter ego, he appeared in Ultima Online and was killed during an in-game beta test on August 9th, 1997. They were doing a population stress test on the server, and a player character now known as Reigns cast the Firefield spell, killing Lord British, and was like banned.
I'm just amazed that they didn't make him invincible. Like,
apparently there was an exploit because of the beta test that like he for a moment was not invincible.
Oh my god, that's like really like taking down like a, I don't know, like a mythical godlike person. Like for one moment, every beta test, he's not invincible.
Right. And Lord British died on that day in Ultima Online, August 9, 1987. Another fun story. We could talk about Ultima all day, sequels and spin-offs, but we got 2 other Ultima games to play through, 4 and 5. At least 4, actually. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure if 5 came to the West. But we'll play them regardless. And who knows? Maybe Ultima 4 fixes everything we talked about. There is one thing I forgot to do, though. It's a very important thing. It's something we do every episode, and we're going to have to do it again today. We are going to have to decide if Ultima Exodus for the Nintendo Entertainment System is on the Essential Games list. Sean, you are up first. Please give your vote for the Essential Games list.
I've basically said my piece on most of my opinions on this game, but the bottom line is that this is another one of those great collections of ideas that, while it very well may have been amazing in 1989, and I love it for a lot of different systems and cool little things, it right now is just a frustration to play, and I was really kind of hating myself near the end of my playthrough. I didn't finish, but I can't take away from the things that it did. But I can also not put this on the Essential Games list.
I can't, in good faith, knowing the time sink of this game and the value that is inside of it. The essence of what this game really is. I can't recommend this to anybody. Not even on like the like if you're interested level. Like there are so many RPGs. You'll find something other than Ultima Exodus. I don't know what it is about this game, but I'm exhausted. Not that the episode is so long. I'm exhausted about how much I had to say about this game, how much I had to play this game, how much I had to look into this game. This was a task that I wouldn't put on anybody else, and so I can't recommend this game to anybody. It is not on my Essential Games
You're a
list.
martyr.
Joe?
All right, this might be a little bit of a surprising statement, but I did have fun. I did have quite a bit of fun playing this game. And when I first started, I'll say when I first started this game, my initial thought was like, oh my god, like this has got to be an Essential game. Like once I play more of it. Obviously, I did quite a 180 on that thought as I played more. But I think that I'm doing with this sort of the opposite of what I do with shmups a lot. A lot of times I'll say about a shmup like, hey, this game is just not in the genre that I like, but I get why other people like it. And I think, to be fair, I have to do that with this game too, where it's like, this game is in the genre I like, and I'm really excited about it to finally get to play like an RPG proper on the NES. Kind of like I had to kind of stop and examine that and be like, how much of that is me just being like pumped to finally be able to play this, and how much of it is like actually like good or actually bad. So I made a little pros and cons list, and sorry for being a little long-winded. I know we're on a long episode here, but here's what I ended up with my pros and cons list. Pro: there's a good sense of exploration that we don't see in a ton of games yet on the NES. But here's 3 cons. The different towns and locations don't mean too much because they're just not different enough most of the time. There's only one continent that's very deceiving at first. It looks like a huge world, but the more you explore, you realize it's a very small world that loops a lot. And 3, you absolutely, in my opinion, need a guide. So those 3 cons already more than negate the pro. Okay, the next pro is there's a variety of strategies and techniques that you can use in the battles, which is true. There's a lot. The next con is that most of the battles are almost all grinding. There's a lot of luck. There's no boss battles. There's almost no time to use those strategies. Again, the con negates the pro. Third pro, the 3D mazes were, in my opinion, the best that we've had on the NES as far as like orientation and feeling like you know where you're going and you can actually feel like you're going. But for some reason, they made this choice that all these early NES games seem to make, where they just make things completely based on like random like guess and check, completely like negating the fact that they're mazes at all, because you just gotta guess. Finally, my last pro here is that there's a good level up system that's unique. You gain experience in like a different way than you would. You gain experience, but you level up when you want to, when you go to the king or whatever. You visit shrines to increase your attributes, which is like a little journey in and of itself. But the game feels like it's more fun to use an exploit that avoids using those level ups for most of the game. It would take so much longer to actually play it the way it wants. And for those reasons, I mean, clearly this game should not be on the essential games list. I will say, though, that I would say if you're interested in this kind of thing, you might like it. You might like, exploring around and kind of seeing this if you're an RPG fan. But yeah, not essential.
Wow.
Joe, I can't believe you're going to subject people to playing this game.
I just think I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy it. I think there are other people out there.
I'm only teasing anyway. No. It's like everybody, like you were saying with the shmup thing too. It's like there are some people who probably think that if it's a shmup, I automatically like it. Like we have these things and quirks about us. I can understand what you're saying, but I have to give that recommendation of like just maybe find some other RPG. Like there's got to be something else out there that just released on Steam a couple weeks ago that you can play instead.
Well, I mean, that was another thing I thought a lot about too. Is like there's so many RPGs. There's really no reason to go back to this one unless you're interested in like what it was like a weird attempt to try like an early RPG. Like that's what makes it interesting, and it's fun to create your characters and all that stuff. Well, gentlemen, it was a great episode. Certainly one of our longest ever. I can't guarantee that next week's episode, which is Dance Aerobics, will be any longer. It might be 3 to 4 hours.
I think we could find some material.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, well, because that's with the Power Pad also, right? Like this game.
Yeah.
I played this with the Power Pad.
Any NES game can be played with the Power Pad.
I didn't know that. Anyway.
Yeah. A lot of crazy things.
But the funny thing about Dance Aerobics, of course, is that it takes place in the Ultima universe. So it's like you have, like right next to Ambrosia is Dance Aerobics.
Right. Only when the moon is full, when both moons are full. Right.
Oh yeah, that's the secret unlock in this game. You beat Ultima Exodus, you unlock Dance Aerobics.
Right. Well, this podcast is basically every time we beat a game, we unlock the next game that came out.
That's true. So hopefully one of us beat it, or else we're not going to unlock Dance Aerobics. All right, if you're still listening, wow, thank you so much. We
appreciate
really like the three. Yeah, you really like the three of us. Although a couple people have said they don't like the Bills.
I don't know how that's possible.
I don't know how you can like Nostalgia Cast and not the Bills. They kind of go hand in hand.
Well, I don't know.
We are a sponsor.
I'm not I don't know like a ton about the NFL, but the one thing that I do know that everybody should remember is that John Elway is not the owner of the Denver Broncos. I'm specifically talking to you, Sean.
I don't forget that.
Please don't forget.
I can remember that. Yeah.
Because I just want to make sure you don't ever like.
I mean, I do know that. I mean, I've known that for a long time.
Right. Good.
Yeah.
If you want to find more nostalgia, just check out the Twitter page at NostalgiaCast. We're posting things every Monday to Friday. We do not usually post on Saturdays and Sundays because we respect your weekend and we want you to go outside and have a great time. Or inside. Do
wear a
whatever
mask.
You want. I'm not the boss of you. Yeah, wear a mask inside and outside. And while you sleep at night, whatever you want. Maybe that mask is over your eyes, though, instead of over your mouth, you know? Like, we're not the boss of you. You're actually the boss of us. So tweet at NostalgiaCast and just start making, like, high-level executive decisions about what the show should be and what we should be doing. I think we're at that point now where we can take the honest feedback that we've been seeking. So,
yeah. Well, Twitch runs NostalgiaCast.
Yeah, exactly.
Runs
exactly.
Nostalgia.
That's how it's doing it.
I'm Mike Esposito. You can find me at Esposito Film on Twitter. You're not the boss of me, so don't tweet me and tell me things about myself. I don't need to hear them. At NostalgiaCast is where you direct all feedback to the show. For me, you can usually find nothing. I don't even know why I give out my Twitter handle. I tweet once a month. All right. Exodus.